Hi, welcome to the overview video of my Casual Platformer template plugin. In this video, what we're gonna cover is just a general overview of different aspects of this plugin, so you can get familiar and understand how the project works. Also, there's gonna be some documentation in the plugin description, and you can also join my Discord if you have any questions about the plugin. So first, let's click play and see kind of how the game looks. So we are in the main menu level. And if we go to maps, we can see we have two levels. So go to the main menu level and click play. And in here we have few things. We have the scoreboard, we have coins, we have skins, and then few buttons. So the main idea is that the player can pick up coins, and coins right now are just visual, so you don't have any functionality for them out of the box. The player can just pick them up in the level. Then you have the scoreboard, which gives you the playtime and the score. And then you have your skins just exposed in here. Of course, you can use it in a different way, but you have kind of a skeleton for it. You also have options. In here you can decrease or increase the sound for the music or for the sound. Next thing, we can click on new. And now we're in the game. So what's happening here is that you can move your character in WSAD. There is a back limit that moves every 2 seconds, so you can see how it's kind of moving towards the player. And if the player goes too far back, he's gonna get an error, caution close to the back limit, meaning he's gonna die soon if he doesn't start moving forward. You have a few different lane types. You have grass, road, train tracks, and also river. And you have the settings to kind of create more variations, but we're gonna cover that later. And if you stop on the coins, you can pick them up. And also you have the sounds, the soundtrack, UI and stuff like that. So now let's die and see what happens. So depending on how we die, we can die in different ways. So right now we got squashed and we collected 1 coin and we are on the tile 29 where we died. And then we can try again or go to main menu. So that's kind of the general loop. And now let's go into details and see kind of how each aspect of the game works. So let's start with the player. So in this main menu map, we don't actually have the character. This is just visual stuff. So this is just a static mesh or skeletal mesh. And here we just have some cinematics. So if we go to Casual Platformer, we can open cinematics. And this is basically mostly for main menu because we have the character that is in the beginning and he is kind of in the middle of the jump. And then we have 2 levels that will load or unload depending on if you want the car or the train and the background for the car or the train. And that is all controlled in menu cinematic. And you also have some fade-ins. So that's kind of the main menu. Now let's go to the character. So I'm gonna go to blueprints, player, and then we have 2 things for the player. So we have player pawn and possessable pawn. Possessable pawn is the actual pawn in the game that is jumping. And for him, we have basic stuff. So we set up the texture and we also do some cleanup for the character because our terrain generator can generate something on the player. So we want to just check just in case if there is something on the player or on him. And then we have just basic begin overlap. This is for the coin. So when you stop on the coin, you can pick it up. So that's the possessable pawn. And the reason why I separated player pawn and possessable pawn is because I want the player camera to be separated from the pawn because there is some delays to the camera. We kind of want to manage it in different ways and I didn't want it connected directly to the pawn. So I kind of separated it into separate player pawn. This also lets you more easily swap the player controller or player character actor if you want, because this player pawn just follows any actor or any pawn, so you don't have to have this specific pawn. So that's kind of 2 reasons. And we can just quickly open player pawn. This sets the actor rotation and there is some camera delays. And there is also zoom in animation when you die. The camera zooms in a bit. So that's the basics for the player, nothing too crazy. Now let's go to our game instance. And in here we have few things. So first thing is that we load stats. So depending on what was happening, we can load the stats. So if we go to the load stats event, we basically find a save game and then load stuff. And you also have the save stats option. In here we also have the texture setting, and the reason why I use Blueprint interfaces here is just to have a little bit of easier access. They're not too important for the game instance. I just didn't want the users to have, or the developers to continuously have to cast to get to the game instance. This was a bit nicer, so that's kind of why I use game instances in this way. And also we have coins and volume. So in game instance you can hold anything that is kind of general for the game. So music and sound volume are global for the whole game, so that's why I'm holding it here. Coins are also global, so I want the total coins to be accessible through the game and when you're in the menu. Then you have the scoreboard and select the texture. So this is all that we want global to hold, so I put it in the game instance. We can quickly cover game mode for the main menu, because it's pretty simple, and then you're gonna go for the in-game game mode. So for the main menu we just have a setup, and that's kind of it. So we create the UI, we show the cursor, and after a little bit of a delay we play the sound and also start playing the music. And that's about it for the main menu. Then we have game mode for in-game, but before we go to that, let's go to our player controller, since we already covered the player a little bit. In here is where we hold a bunch of stuff. Let me close all of this so we have it a bit cleaner. So here we have a whole bunch of stuff for the inputs. We don't want input to be on the player character or on the camera that follows the player character. We want input to be on the player controller, so that's why I put it in here. So what's happening here is we get the player UI, we set it up, we add mapping input context. So this is basically for the basic WSAD movement. And then we get the possessible pawn reference. And this is a big event. This is basically for your whole movement, because the only thing that the player can do is go forward, backward, left, or right. So this is all happening in here. The character can be in 3 states: idle, jumping, or dead, and depending on which state he is, he can do different stuff. If the player is in the idle state, we want to check if he is blocked or not. This means we cast a line trace and check if there is something in the direction that the player wants to go. If there is nothing, he can jump there. If there is something, we could do some stuff, maybe let the player know, but for now there is nothing there. But if we can go, we generate a new line, or check if we need to generate a new line. This is for our level generator, we're going to cover that later. And then depending if we are attached to a log, so in the river you can jump on the log and then the log will kind of take you. If you're attached to the log, you can detach from it and then basically adjust the player location here. And then you do the jump action. So jump action is the last thing, and this is when the character is ready to do the jumping animation. And then if you go there, we change our character state, we set a new character location, and now we need to do the animation for the jumping. That is something that is happening in here. So here is the animation. If you open this up, you can see we have a timeline and stuff that is happening. If you go back, when the animation finishes, some stuff happens. And also before the animation finishes, we also do a little check to see if there is anything below the character. So this is good for stuff like logs. So when you jump on the log, if there is log below you, then you're gonna be attached to the log. And then we just play a sound, and that's basically it. After that, we have our escape button. For this, we just have a flip. Basically, when you click escape, it's gonna choose A or B, and if it was on E before, it's gonna choose B. So this basically enables or disables your in-game pause menu. Pretty simple. So let's save this. The next thing is game mode for in-game. This one is going to be a little bit more complicated because it deals with level generation. So first, let's just generally cover how the level generation works in this project. So you have this C tile factory and C level generator, and these two components basically deal with everything for level generation and creation of the tiles and spawnables. And the level generator basically tells the tile factory what lanes to spawn and when to spawn them. And then the tile factory actually spawns the lanes and the spawnables and stuff like that. So the reason why I made them components and why I made them separate is because they kind of deal with separate stuff, but I wanted to make them highly coupled, so I put them in the game mode as components. And then in the beginning, I just referenced each other, so they have direct references to each other. But since they're in the game mode, I can use Blueprint interfaces for the game mode, so either actors outside of the game mode can access it. So let's find one. So one would be this new lane event, which basically triggers when the player goes forward. We're going to evaluate if there is the new line should spawn, and if it should, it's gonna call this event, and this event is gonna call the level generator and say, hey, we want to create a new line. And then the level generator is gonna say, okay, we are on this location, and then it's gonna tell the tile factory on this location spawn a new lane of this type and stuff like that. Why I do it like this, why I have the blueprint interfaces for this, is just for easier access. So I don't really like, especially if there is something that's going to be called frequently, I don't really want casting. So what we can do is get game mode, and then we can do, let's say, add new lane, and we can just call it like this instead of doing cast to in game mode and then finding the add new lane. So instead of doing something like this and having to cast every time, especially if you expand this template and you add multiple game modes, then you would have to cast, check if it failed, do some stuff, or find some additional or different way to do this. So instead of doing with casting, you can just do this, and then you can just implement the solution for different game modes and easily access it. So that's kind of the thought behind it. And also, since they are going to be calling each other frequently and I don't want any lag, I made them highly coupled so they directly reference each other. So before we go into all of this, let's quickly cover level generator and tile factory. So I'm not going to cover each function in detail. I'm just going to talk about the two main functions, and then there is some supporting functions that are not that important, so we don't have to cover them here. So first, on the begin play, what we do is we just get the reference to the tile factory, and after one tick we just get pawn reference because there is sometimes the pawn is not still set, so we want to wait just one tick. So this is done in the level generator, and this is the setup. Now you'll notice that it doesn't automatically go and start creating the tiles or lanes, and we're gonna cover that. But the next important function in here is this initialize lanes. And the reason why this one is important is because this is where we load the initial batch of lanes. So if you imagine your player, there is some lanes when you start the game that would need to be created. Some behind the character, but mostly in front. So it would be something like this. So this initialize lane has back offset. It's basically saying how many lanes to spawn on the back and then how many lanes to spawn in front. And then for each lane, it calls the tile factory and says, spawn me the lane, and there is some checkouts in here. That's kind of the general idea here. And this is activated in the lane factory, so let's close that. And this is activated in the lane factory. So what's happening in the lane factory is, let's find our begin play, is we get the reference, and then after we get the reference to the level generator, we load tile types. And what load tile types does is has this soft object reference of different types of tiles. And why I made it the soft object reference is because I want the user to more easily expand this system, where if let's say you have 50 tiles in your game, instead of having to have loaded all the 50 tiles, even if in this specific level you only need, let's say, 5 or 10 tiles, you can just set up these tile types. Maybe at runtime you don't have to load them in here and set them up pre-made like this. You could set it up in the game mode and then trigger the loading of the tile types. So basically you would populate this soft object reference with the tiles that you care about, and then you have these loaded tiles. So basically we take the soft object references, we load them, and then put them in the loaded tiles array, and that's basically happening here. And after the tiles are all loaded, we then call our initialize lane. So here we check if the tiles are loaded. There is an exception if, let's say, for some reason all the tiles are not loaded, how you want to handle that. Right now it's left empty because there is no reason to handle this. It's pretty simple and it works every time with this simple setup, but in the future there might be some exceptional cases, so you would handle it here. And then you call the initialize lanes. So after we load all the tiles and we have all the tiles in memory, now we can call initialize lanes, and we load the front and back for the character. Now, since this is pretty simple right now and there is no long load times, this is basically instant, but later there might be like some more complicated stuff, so there might take like a few frames or something to load, so then you will wait for that and then activate the level generator initialize lanes. The next add new lane is similar to this, basically adding just calling the tile factory and saying, hey, I just want to add one new lane. So you can see it's happening in here. We just have some additional checks. We just check the distance between the character, and here you have the number. Maybe you want to spawn more tiles in front of the character, maybe less. This would also depend on how far up your camera is and stuff like that. You can basically play around with this number. And then you basically call the tileline factory, and also you want to clean up at the end. So as the character moves forward, so if we have something like this, as the character moves forward, you want to start spawning new lanes, but also you want to start deleting the old ones. So that's basically what's happening here. So you don't want to have a situation where you have a bunch of stuff loaded behind the character, but the character is all the way over here. You're just losing performance and memory. So we also check and destroy in the back lane, so we can do some distances and yeah, destroy it. And since we have the lanes array, we can basically just pick the first the first lane and check the distance, and that's about it. So these are kind of the two main functions, and then you have some supporting ones. For the lane factory, so let's go here. So we have this tile lane factory. So this is where the actual tiles are spawned, and if you are adding new, more complex tiles, there might be some exceptions here, how you're gonna create it, so you'd have to maybe do additional stuff. But what's happening basically in here is we get some information about the lanes, where it should be, stuff like that. Then we have our tiles, we pick a random tile and then we spawn it, and we can open this up just to see what's happening in here. We have last integer, we also have weights, so it's not completely equal to what lane you're gonna spawn. You have this lane spawn weights, and this is basically for loaded tiles in here, so how they're loaded. Of course you have to set this up for your loaded lines and how, or loaded tiles, and how you want basically what is the probability of them spawning, because you probably want different probabilities if it's a road, if it's a grass, if it's trains and stuff like that. So after we do this, let's go back to our tileline factory. Then we just check if it's a river. There is an exceptional case for the river here, because different lanes spawn differently. So normally how lanes would be spawned is like this. So this would be like one empty actor, and then you would have a static mesh instance that can hold where you spawn different instances of the tiles. So this would kind of save memory because all the tiles are the same. So you have this static mesh instance, it generates the points or generates the tiles, and this would be default way. But for the river, how the river works is you have a tile, but the tile is just a stretched plane, and then you have the water in here. So that's kind of the setup. So that's why we need exception in here. We are checking, is the tile type river? If it is, we go to river lane spawner. And in the normal case, we go in here, we spawn a lane, we set static mesh, and then add instances to populate the lane with each tile. So that's kind of the general idea. Let's just see if there is any. You have the river lane spawner, so this might be important if you want to change how river works. So it's all set up in here. We also have a special tag for it, so we know it's a river. There is a special check when the character is landing to check what is below him, and if it's a river, he dies. So that's kind of why it's important, so we know that this mesh is the river. And then we also add an instance for static mesh, but we only add one instance. We don't add for each tile, we add one plane and then just stretch it out. So here we have the length and stuff like that. So that's the general idea for the generator lane factory. Now if we go into our game, now this is gonna be a bit more understandable because there is some stuff in here for lanes. So first on beginning play we have this set timer by events. So how our game works, if you remember, is that there is some back limit, that if the character passes some point, he's gonna die, so he always has to continue moving forward. So what's happening is there is a kind of invisible line, but the player gets a notification that is moving every X seconds. So I think right now it's 2 seconds. And if it passes the character, it's gonna say you lost and you can start over. So this is that lane setup here, back limit. Then you have your controller pawn reference, and then you play some in-game music. This handle new player is where we actually spawn the pawn, and then we possess it with our controller, get control of it. Then we have update coin count. So this is when we update, when we collect the coin, this is triggered, and we go to the game instance and do stuff there. Then we have player died. So what happens when the player dies? Just in case I put these 2 once, but usually this it's only triggered once, but just in case if something exceptional happens. So there is that state, you have the zoom in to the character, you have to update coins. So we take the collected coins and we put them in the total coins. So if the player has not died but maybe clicked Alt F4 or something, so that won't be saved. So we want to only save when the player actually finishes the run. Then we have clear invalidate. This is for the back limit, so when the character is dead, there is still cars going, the game is still going. We are just we have the pause menu, so we don't want the back limiter to catch up to us, and then we get the warning while the character is dead. And then there is different death types, so there is different way that character dies when he's ran over, when he goes into the water, or when the back limit catches up to him, or he goes out of bounds and stuff like that. So the character can also go out of bounds if he's on the log, and then the log pulls him to the bounds, so he can go out of bounds. Then you have this add new lane, so as we talked about, this is gonna check if the new lane is needed and then call the lane factory to create new lane. This is updating the back limit. And then when we call this, we get a bunch of stuff in here, and there is different ways to update the back limit, so I kind of separated the functions. And at the end we have this update score, so we want to call update on the score if something changes. So this for the UI, you have also event dispatchers here. So that's the general idea of how this game mode works. Now let's just go over one more thing, and that is data assets. So how do your tile types actually work? So where do you define that? That would be in these data assets. So if you go in here, we have this PDA tile, and this is primary data asset that basically just holds a bunch of variables. You have your tile type, lanes, static mesh, spawnables, spawn probability, and spawn scarcity. And it looks like this. So let's open it up just to see what all the stuff that we have. So first, what tile type this is. This will define how this tile acts. Then you have your lanes, then you have the static mesh. We define the primary tile type that is going to be spawned. And then we have a bunch of spawnables, and spawnables can be different types. So if it's a prop, it's basically blocking type. That means that when the character tries to go there, it's gonna not let you jump on that tile. Collectible basically means something that player can pick up. And there is also different types. So if it's a vehicle, that means it's gonna go from one side to the other, or it's going to be spawned on the edge and then it's going to be a movable object. You have passable prop. This means the prop that you can go through, so different types of objects it doesn't have. So if it's like a really small rock, it can still be a prop that is on a tile, but now the player can jump on it. Log is something you can jump on, so there is different types of spawnables. Then you have spawnables probability and spawnables scarcity. And this is basically how likely stuff is to spawn, so that's the probability. And then for each tile, what is the percentage that there will be something spawned on it. So what this means is if we put this to 0.1, that means there is 10% for each tile that there is going to be something on it. And then if there is something on it, what is the probability for each? So it's going to pick one of these based on the weights. So I think this is coins, so let's put this to 55 just to kind of showcase what's happening in here. So let's click play, let's click new. And now you can see the chances for coin being spawned is way higher. We can see way more coins. But if you put this back to 8 and click play, we can see coins are way more sparse, because now there is probably less than 1 in 10 chance for the coin to be spawned. So that's the probability. And then scarcity. So if you put this to, let's say, 0.5, there should be 5 more times stuff on the terrain. So if I click new, we can see there is a bunch of stuff, and now our character can barely pass through. So depending on what you want to do, you can change these probabilities to get what you want. And just to kind of showcase this one more time, I'm gonna put this to 55. Now there should be way more coins than before, but it's still gonna be very dense. So this might be a good way to make like a special level where player can get way more coins than normally. So maybe once every 10 levels player can get like a special level where he just picks up coins. So that's kind of how this works. So let's bring them back. This setup is similar for all of them. The only one that has 2 lanes is road, because for the road you have to have 2 directions, so cars going in both directions. And you can see the probabilities, how they work for the cars. So for a truck, he's a bit less likely to be spawned, and there is 1 in 3 chance to be spawned. But this also doesn't work in a normal way. There is different ways that you can use that scarcity. So if we go back to the blueprints, we go to world and we go to lane. So lane is where we actually use that scarcity and probability and we do something with it. So if we do spawnable grass, we can see that we have that scarcity and then we do some probabilities. There is also get random weighted index, so we have that spawn probability and then we do some weighted calculations. Let's go back here. And then we spawn. If it's a coin, we put the tags. So it's important to have tags because then later when we trace, we can check what type it is. And for, let's say, the road, we have different ways that we spawn the cars. So you don't have to use probabilities like I use them, but you can use them in similar ways. But yeah. So the tile setup that we were looking at before is loaded here, and then in here it's all of those properties are used to define which spawnable object needs to be spawned, what is the probability for each, and what we basically want to do. And when we spawn stuff, we have different types. We have movable and we have level edge. Level edge is unrelated to this system. Level edge is basically something that is in the level already and just doesn't let the player go in there. So it's kind of a blocking object, but it always follows the player from the sides. And then we have a movable, which is the object that spawns when you have a road or a log or something like that. It can be movable. So if you have a vehicle, that would be movable. So we would set this static mesh to the car, and then we have projectile movement and do some stuff to check the speed and see how fast the object needs to go. So this is kind of spawned, but when you spawn the props, it's just a basic static mesh. So there is different ways that you can spawn your objects. So in general, that is about it. Last things that I'm gonna cover is assets. So in here you have all of your assets. So this includes UI and sounds. In blueprints for the components, here is your level generator and lane factory. For the game, this basically means usually game manager, so game modes, game instances, player controllers. Interfaces, this is just two interfaces that we talked about, game instance and game mode. For the player, we have possessable and player pawn. Sound classes, so these are used when you want globally to change volume, so you don't have to manually change each volume when the player changes the volume slider. And then we have UI, so we have main menu, options, pause menu, and player UI. And then in the world, we have the world I basically mean by objects that are not related to player, basically environmental blueprints. So that is about it for the casual platformer. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can join my Discord and ask some questions there.